Today's show is brought to you by Audible, and right now you can get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/joinedup. There's over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle or MP3 player. Thanks for tuning in to the Joined Up Writing Podcast, a weekly show featuring interviews with fantastic authors sharing their personal stories on how and why they write. There's hints and tips for aspiring writers and great book reviews from top bloggers. Follow us on Twitter at JU Podcast. Right, cue the cheesy theme tune.
Put down your pen and stop your typing. Grab yourself a drink, 'cause it's Joined Up Writing.
Hello and welcome to the Joined Up Writing Podcast, where a little procrastination can go a long way. I'm Wayne Kelly and it's episode 94. I'm a little bit sniffly, so excuse the cold. But it's the last one of the year and it's a proper Christmas cracker with the lovely, talented and inspirational worried writer herself, Sarah Painter. It's been a couple of years since Sarah last visited the show and she's got a ton of stuff to say about dealing with self-doubt, her writing process and the fact that she now has a foot in both the indie and traditional publishing worlds. She also very sneakily managed to turn my chat into an interview of me, so you'll get to hear a bit more about me talking about my own journey, and there'll be a quick visit to Book Bloggers Corner with Catherine Sunderland reviewing Sam Carrington's psychological thriller One Little Lie. First, a quick catch up to tell you that I'm now fully immersed in the follow-up to Safe Hands, with ideas, plots, subplots popping into my head on an almost hourly basis, and I've begun some of the actual writing, but I'm also tinkering with notes, and after a recent chat with upcoming guest Merle Nygate, I've pulled out my 3-act structure outlining template that I use for script writing, and often in the structural edit of my novel writing projects as well. I'm not sure how detailed an outline I'll do because, let's face it, once a pantser, always a pantser, but this book is going to be a lot more complicated than the first novel, so I do think I need to at least spend some time considering the many possibilities and the ways I could take the story. I find it really useful for shaping and pacing the story, and the template allows for both main narrative and subplot threads. And if you want to get your hands on that yourself, I have actually added it to the downloads available for those of you who sign up to my free newsletter over at joinedupwriting.co.uk. So if you're already a member, I'll be sending that out over the next couple of days or so. And if you sign up new, you'll get that, and you'll also get that in addition to the first of my inspirational 10 tips PDFs with advice on how to complete NaNoWriMo and also finish your first draft. And there'll be more free stuff in the future, including bonus podcast episodes and more helpful downloads. It takes seconds, and all I need really is your name and your email. Other than that, I'm looking forward to the festive break and hope to get back to a non-fiction project that I'm working on with Maria Smith. More info on that to come early next year. But what about you guys? What are you working on? Do you have any new writing goals or resolutions for the new year? Let me know by dropping me an email at wayne@waynekellywrites.com, or you can tweet the show at JU Podcast, or you can find us on Facebook. I'd love to hear from you, and I'll definitely give you a mention in the first show of 2019. Right. Let's get to today's interview with Sarah Painter. So Sarah writes contemporary fiction with a touch of magic, some historical fiction thrown in there as well, and she's recently produced an excellent non-fiction book, Stop Worrying and Start Writing. Before writing books, Sarah worked as a freelance magazine journalist, blogger and editor. Her debut, The Language of Spells, became a Kindle bestseller and was followed by The Secrets of Ghosts, The Garden of Magic and In the Light of What We See, and more recently, but she's had books including The Night Raven and Beneath the Water, which we mention. She also podcasts about writing, and she interviews other authors and creative types over at worriedwriter.com, which I can't recommend highly enough. I really enjoyed chatting to Sarah, and I think you'll get a kick out of it too. Okay, Sarah, thanks so much for coming on Joined Up Writing. Really appreciate it. So we had a little bit of an off-air catch-up there, but why don't you just tell us a little bit about what you've been up to and what's your most recent book, what's your most recent release that you've got out at the moment?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me on the podcast again. It's lovely to be here. So my most recent release is called The Night Raven, and that came out on the 23rd of October. So it's not been out very long. And the one before that was a book with Lake Union, which was called Beneath the Water, and that came out in February. So it's been a busy year.
Yeah, it's great. And you're kind of diversifying a little bit, aren't you? Because in terms of genre and things, so I know, because I think Beneath the Water in particular, that's kind of slight departure, isn't it, from your kind of Language of Spells books and things?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not very smart, Wayne, and I love reading across the board, loads of different genres, and so I've just been really following whatever my sort of muse takes me, which is not the smart thing to do at all. So I followed The Language of Spells and The Secrets of Ghosts and The Garden of Magic, which were all that sort of contemporary fiction with a tiny hint of magic. And then I followed that with something that was part psychological thriller, part historical, and that was In the Light of What We See. And then Beneath the Water is again a dual narrative, so it's got a historical strand and a present day strand, and again a wee bit of a sort of a thrillerish element in there as well. And then I decided to really go back to my sort of magic loving roots, but really embrace it. And The Night Raven is definite urban fantasy, kind of mystery, private investigator in London, but a London which also has 4 magical families.
Oh, brilliant.
So, I'm just jumping all over the place.
That sounds a little bit sort of similar to, type thing to like Ben Aranovich or stuff like that. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Which I love. I love that stuff.
I do. I really love that series. And yes, I've always loved fantasy and stuff. I love Neil Gaiman.
Me too.
Yeah. So, and I think we waxed lyrical on this last time we chatted, but Joss Whedon.
Yeah.
So I found Beneath the Water really, really hard to write. And it went through multiple rounds of edits, and it was a real struggle. It didn't have an ending for the longest time. The historical strand was really fascinating, but it was quite heavy going, the whole thing. And I just really wanted to have some fun. So I had this idea for the sort of mystery urban fantasy thing. And I thought, I'm just going to have fun. I'm just going to write this. And it came out the sort of probably the easiest book in terms of, because I don't plot or anything, and it really flowed, and I had so much fun. And considering I'm quite a tortured sort of a writer, I really did have fun doing it. And it was just a lovely, refreshing change.
Yeah, obviously I know you're kind of being a bit self-effacing there, saying that it's not the smart thing to do, but I mean, it depends on how you look at it. Because possibly from like a business point of view, and people talk about, well, this is your niche now and you've carved out this this group of readers or whatever. But then the creative side of that is, and there's many successful authors that do it the other way, which is, well, I'm really interested in this at the moment and that's what I'm feeling, so that's what I'm going to write. It's just that it can be quite difficult it's just that it can be difficult from an economic point of view, I suppose. So how have you found that sort of, I know that it's kind of probably still fairly early days with things, but in terms of, do you find the people that read like The Language of Spells and things like that, are they kind of did they happily move over to like the historical fiction type stuff, or is it a whole new load of readers? How did that, I know you might not know exactly, but
the tricky thing is that I do feel as if that the people who liked the first 3 books were maybe a wee bit separate to the audience that I gained for In the Light of What We See and Beneath the Water. But because those were both done, all of those books were done via publishers, you don't have as much information really.
Sure.
I've got my newsletter, and I do get lots of people who seem to have crossed over, but I don't have a massive newsletter, so that's maybe not a really
you just sort of have to go on
indication.
instinct.
But the other thing is, because Lake Union are very good at selling books, they're an imprint of Amazon, and they really know what they're doing. So In the Light of What We See really did sell, not really well in the big scheme of things. It's not, I'm not a superstar author or anything, but it did do pretty well. But the weird thing is that I don't know who those people are.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was really concerned about the Night Raven and how my little core of readers that I am in touch with, my lovely, lovely newsletter people who are really chatty and fantastic. I was a wee bit worried that I was going to be letting them down. But I've had really good feedback, good early reviews, and I've actually done the Night Raven myself. So I can see what's going on, and sales they've been good. I don't have much to compare it to in terms of knowing the exact numbers early days. But for example, I'm already into profit, so I've already earned enough, and it's been out less than a month. To cover, the editing and the cover and all of the, the formatting and everything that you do. So I'm delighted with that. I have no idea if that's good or not, but I'm thrilled.
Well, yeah, because it straight away, as you say, you justified it and you've covered it. If you're looking at it purely from a business perspective, it's you've, as you say, you've covered your costs, which is like the bare minimum that you want to achieve to start off with, isn't it?
Well, that's it, because it's a wee bit scary, the idea of, much as I love this, I want to be hybrid, and I've been planning it for a long time, but it is a bit scary because you think, well, should I be just sticking with a publisher? Is that not the safest thing to do? So yeah, so far so good, but the main thing is that I've had really great early reviews, so I am massively relieved.
Yeah, understandably. So what made you want to drive that? Where was that drive coming from too? Because as you say, you are traditionally published as well. So where was that drive coming from to have a go at it yourself and go the independent route as well?
Well, I think really it was a couple of things. First off, back when we spoke, I think initially I was so happy and so grateful to be published, and it was amazing, and I still am, happy and grateful for those things. But I also really, really freaked out because suddenly I had this thing that I had been dreaming of my whole life, but it wasn't a magical land where everything was suddenly okay. You would still have to submit. You can still get and will get rejected. I had this amazing agent, but everything was still contingent on selling another book. And that pressure, that knowledge that it could all disappear, it really didn't do my mental health any good at all. I was so anxious. I found it difficult to write. I felt paralyzed. I spent a lot of my time job hunting for jobs I didn't want, because I just felt so out of control. So that made me look at it I decided to look at it as a business. And as soon as I looked at it as a business, that, oh my goodness, the sense of control that gave me, and of course I started the podcast, I started The Worried Writer, I thought about, I started working on a non-fiction book, I applied, as I say, this sort of business mindset to my author career. And whether that was an illusion or not, it really did give me this sense of control, which basically gave me my sanity back again. It calmed me down and let me sort of enjoy writing again. And knowing that I could put something out myself, if it didn't find a home or if I chose to do that, just sort of revolutionized my sort of day-to-day well-being. So there was that. And then I did do the Stop Worrying, Start Writing book. So that was the non-fiction title. And of course, that made sense to do it myself. I had a small audience with the podcast, and I chatted to my agent about it, and she was very, very, very supportive and said, yes, that does make sense to do it yourself. So all of that gave me these sort of ticks, I suppose, to encouragement. And then that was it. I got completely bitten by the bug, because the control, it was amazing being able to commission the cover, to choose the title and the subtitle. And then, of course, the more I learned about it, because I was determined to do it, as well as possible. So I really immersed myself in researching how to independently publish well or professionally. And so I think it's just one of those things, the more you learn about it, the more clear it becomes that it's a really, really sensible idea.
Yeah, and it looks. I mean,
know.
I've seen the cover for Stop Worrying and Start Writing, and it looks really, really good. It's a really, really nice, clean design and stuff, and that must be, as you say, kind of a great feeling. But it's kind of funny because I got into a conversation just literally today, actually, with a guest that's been somebody that's been on the show before, and they kind of put something on Facebook, and I think they were a bit miffed and they were having a bit of a crisis of confidence, or at least they were feeling a bit philosophical, and they were talking about the fact that, what does it actually mean to be a writer? And obviously that's different to everybody. The first thing that I said was, well, if you to be a writer, you only need to do one thing, which is to write. And the person, he agreed with that, but then he said, yeah, but as somebody that's been published, which he has, and he doesn't feel he's got a huge audience or whatever, and he doesn't feel like there's that many people that have read his work. That's also really important to him, and he kind of feels less of a writer knowing that he maybe hasn't got a huge audience. And obviously everybody's got their own kind of validations and things with it, but my argument with it always is that I guess it depends. I suppose, like you said, before you got traditionally published, you thought you would get there and it would be like this promised land, and you'd go there and everything would be perfect. And as always happens in life, you get there and it's not quite exactly how you imagined it was going to be, and so you're kind of, the goalposts move, don't they, or you move the goalposts yourself.
It. Yeah, I was just thinking that when you were saying about the person you were just talking about, it's very much a case of moving the goalposts. So first off, you think, oh, I'll be happy if I just get an agent, I'll be happy. Then you get an agent, you think, well, if I just get a publishing deal, I'll be happy. Then you get a publishing deal and you think, well, okay, if I get a better advance, because you realize there are all these other levels of being published. Yeah. And so, I was immediately beating myself up because it was a digital first deal. Yeah. And so, I wasn't walking into Waterstones and seeing my book on the front table. Sure, yeah. And so, it's always that moving. It's always that striving, which is good, but also you have to recognize that those external things are never going to be enough. Yeah. They're really not. Those posts are always going to move. Yeah. I mean, perhaps if you're J.K. Rowling, I don't know. But for most, for most levels of achievement, that external thing is always going to move. So you have to think then about, I mean, again, like you were saying, what makes a writer is writing. But then it's also, about reaching readers, being read. But then how much is enough? And that's stuff that you have to decide for yourself. And then also, I think, celebrate when you do hit each of the small milestones, sort of really try to make peace with the fact that this is, much as it's an overused phrase, that this is a journey, and that it's not a destination you're going to get to when you're suddenly going to feel amazing. Because that's the other thing with doing the podcast, and I'm sure you've found the same thing. Absolutely. I've spoken to authors who I am totally in awe of. They are massively successful Sunday Times best-selling authors, or people who have sold millions of books. But it doesn't matter whether I'm speaking to, Miranda Dickinson or Mark Edwards or Mel Sherratt or Joanna Penn. They all have the same day-to-day life, the same struggles. They still have to do the work. Their writing life is essentially the same. Yeah. And they're dealing with essentially the same feelings of self-doubt, of procrastinating, of getting that awful review that crushes you. Yeah. Of feeling like, and that that comparing, they all still do that. They all still think that there's somebody else that they are aspiring to be like, or, who has achieved more, who is a real writer in, inverted commas. Yeah, yeah. And that comes down, I know that's something Joanna Penn's talked about before, about validation and the different ways people look for validation. Like for some people it's, I need to sell 1 million copies. For other people it's like, I need to win that literary award, or I need to, or whatever it is. Everyone's got different things. But I think, and I definitely do think it changes, and I kind of said that to the writer that I was chatting to today from a point of view. I said I can kind of understand why he's maybe feeling a little bit disillusioned at the moment, because he thought that he would get published and he would be, that was
the thing for him. And then he realised that when he was published, and he had other issues around that as well, which, you know, he wasn't happy with the way that it was published in different bits and pieces. But it sort of happened, and then you know, and then he realised, well, what's the point of being published if there's hardly anybody that's and if there's hardly anyone that's read my book, then kind of what's the point? And I kind of said, I mean, I think with anything, because as you say, it's the same with the podcast to a certain extent, because it's, you know, you get to if it was a case of, well, I'm going to be broadcasting to 1 million people every week, I wish, but you know, if you're only going to do it because you think you're going to get X amount of listeners or X amount of readers or whatever it is, then you're probably never going to be happy, is the reality of it. And you kind of have to find other reasons. The way I described it today was kind of almost like reverse engineering it. So one of the things I used to do was music. So I used to, I'd go out and perform, and I'd write songs, and I'd perform. I was in a band, and I've been in a duo and different bits and pieces. And anybody that is listening to this that's ever done that original music, unless you were absolutely brilliant from the get-go and you managed to get a bit of a following and all that kind of thing, the reality of it is that you'll be out on a rainy Tuesday night, playing to 3 people, you know, in a bar or wherever it happens to be, and you come to a decision. You know, you're like, well, and for me it'd be like, well, if I can see one person is into it, you know, out of those 3 or 4 people that turned up, if I can see one person's actually listening, and that one person maybe comes over at the end and said, oh, I like that song, or asked me a question about it or something, that would be enough, at least for a period of time. That would be enough for me, because I was like, well, okay, somebody got something out of it. I had an audience, you know, if it's one person, because at the end of the day, I wanted to, regardless of that, I felt this need to write a song or go out and perform or whatever it was. And I think it's the same with writing. I mean, you know, I would still, and I still have continued to write, regardless of having an audience or being published or anything else. It's something I've always done, whether it's been songs or short stories or trying to write a novel or whatever it is, or blog posts or whatever it is. And that's something that I would always do. And I suspect that you're the same. You know, if you decide, if you ditched your traditional deal tomorrow, and then you decided you weren't going to publish anything on yourself again or whatever, you'd probably still write for yourself, I'm guessing.
Yeah, oh, definitely. And I mean, you're absolutely right. I couldn't agree more about that importance of finding the intrinsic value in what you're doing. Because if you know, well, just exactly as you were saying, you know, if you know why you're doing something, and it has value in itself, then obviously all the other external sort of steps and other things that you're aiming for, they are on top of, rather than the be all and end all.
I mean, it's the shorthand of it is kind of find the fun in it. Well, like, why are you doing it?
Yeah, so true.
And I suppose the funny thing about your story from the point of view of, you've kind of helped yourself by looking at it as a business, but the funny thing about that is, in a way, you've kind of made it more fun for yourself and less like a job, if that makes sense.
Oh, yes.
Because you were kind of working for somebody else before, in a way.
Yes.
Which I guess is more like a job, whereas when you're doing it yourself, it's like it's your thing, it's your baby, it's you're nurturing it.
Oh, definitely. And I think, again, going back to validation, I, you know, rightly or wrongly, I really wanted to get traditionally published. I wanted that seal of approval from the external, you know, world, which was my hang up. It's not something that I would say that anyone else needs to do, or but that's how I felt about it. But over time, partly, you know, sort of discovering what being published is actually like, but partly through the experience of doing it, of writing books, because the more you write, you know, the
better you get.
I mean, not the better you get, and the better you get at doing it, or understanding, oh yes, this is the part of the process where I'm completely stuck, or you know, this is the part of the process where I really do genuinely believe that everything I have written is dross. It's terrible. It's the worst thing. But then when you've been through that a few times, you're like, oh yes, this is the bit where I feel like that. You know. And I know, because I have been through this, that if I just keep on going, if I keep on writing, that, you know, a plot will emerge, or that this book will eventually be finished. And through all of those kind of experiences, what I really realized was that this wasn't just my dream. This wasn't just the thing that I'd always dreamt of doing. This was the thing that I absolutely wanted to do for the rest of my life. I did not want to get a job. I did not want to do anything else. As difficult as I find writing, and as much as I will avoid doing it at times, oh my goodness, there is absolutely nothing else I want to do. And that was liberating, but also terrifying because, as I say at the time, that was entirely in other people's hands. So, taking back that, taking that sort of locus of control and realizing that I can, in fact, do this myself. I hope, fingers crossed, I do hope to continue to sell, to publishers as well. But to take that control, that for me, that gave me that kind of other purpose.
And do you think, you talked about the validation thing, and that's something that I kind of really relate to with the stage that I'm at, because I do feel, because I've kind of been on a bit, again, like as you say, it's a bit of a cliche, but I've been a bit on that kind of journey that you're talking about. And to the point where probably about 18 months ago, actually, it was pretty much, well, it was probably only about a year and a bit ago, actually, I'd interviewed Joanna Penn, actually. And I remember after that podcast basically deciding, right, you know what, I'm going to independently publish my debut novel. I decided that's what I'm going to do it, because when I was off air from Joanna, she was sort of saying, and I talked about this afterwards, but she sort of said, so when is your book coming out? And she was, as she does, she was quite direct and sort of saying, when's the date for it and stuff. And I thought about it, and I thought, yeah, you know what, she's right, I should do it. And I kind of went on this whole thing. And then I changed my mind. I changed my mind for a number of reasons. And I do think one of the reasons is, I think, obviously you've kind of been through that now, and you've been traditionally published, and as you say, you'll continue to do that, the side of things as well. But I think once you've done that once, and not everybody's the same, I think it depends on how you're wired, but I think once you've done that once, it is kind of like, okay, well, this is kind of how I feel. It's almost like you're giving yourself permission. It's like, well, an outside objective person that in theory should know what they're talking about says that I can do it, and that I'm competent enough to do it, and that, and I think once you've got that, because I don't know, would you say that was kind of what was maybe holding you back in the first place? Was it kind of like somebody told you that you could do it?
I just always thought that was what you did. And then even though I was aware of independent publishing, I just had that feeling. And as I say, I cannot stress enough that I think people like Joanna, who choose themselves, who do not wait for that external validation, they do not wait to be chosen, I admire them hugely. And I am deeply envious. I wish I could go back in time.
Sure.
And I will say to you now and off the air, just do it yourself, Wayne, honestly. So, I really do genuinely feel that, but I also know that for myself, because I'm not, not the most sort of self-confident person, it just was something I had to do. I felt I had to go through that process. Don't get me wrong, if I had got an agent the second time around and then it hadn't all worked out at that point, if Sally Ann had shopped the Language of Spells around and it still hadn't found a home, I honestly don't know. Maybe I would have then come around to doing it myself, because I would have had, the agent liked it.
Sure,
I'd have had something.
I think I think for me, and as you say, I think for a lot of people, maybe not the Joanna Penns of the world, but there's not loads of those. But I think the independent publishing thing, whilst I love the idea of it to a certain extent, because podcasting, really, what is that apart from independent broadcasting?
Radio,
it's the same. It's the same sort of thing. And so you're in control of things like the branding and your name, and when you put things out, and the content and who you have on and everything else. So I love all that stuff. Although sometimes it's difficult to fit it around all your other bits of your life, but I do love all that stuff. But my fear, I think, with going straight to independent indie publishing for me was there's literally no barrier to entry, and I would like there to be a barrier to entry initially for me. I'm not talking for everybody. I'm talking for me.
No, I understand.
Because I have, unfortunately, as much amazing independently published stuff as there is, and there's loads of it now, and it's just, I mean, a lot of it you wouldn't even know it's independently published. You just, you know, because it's done, because, and I think I talked to John about this before, it's not really self-publishing. It's, you know, as you said, you've got you've got a small, you know, you've got a cover designer, you've got an editor, and all the rest of it. But you know, there are people that will literally type 100,000 words into Microsoft Word and then hit publish and put it on Amazon, you know, with you know, Microsoft Paint cover or something on it. And there are those, you know, and there's quite a lot of them if you care to have a look on Amazon or whatever. And so I didn't want to be that person that's kind of deluded, you know. I didn't want to be that person that's like, yeah, you know, hey everybody, I've just independently published this thing. Oh, and then, you know, secretly it's a pile of crap.
No, I mean, I do understand that fear, but you know, all I'm thinking as you're saying those things, the way I look at that aspect of it is simply don't do that. You know, you know, you just said you can spot when it's badly done. Ergo, you won't do it badly.
So. You'd hope so, but
no, not just hope so. I know so. Absolutely, you know. And also, you're not competing in that pool. You know, people say it's same with them talking about submissions, which I believe you're about to embark upon.
I am,
You know, people will give you stats and they'll say, oh, well, you know, I don't know, Agent X gets, you know, 10,000 submissions every year and they take on one client. So it's just ridiculous. There's no point. But that's missing the point. You're not competing against 10,000 submissions.
That's right.
You're competing with the 100 who can spell. You're competing with the 100 who, you know, who can write. Because there actually aren't that many people who can write really well.
I mean, we had, it was a long time ago, and I'd like to get another agent on the podcast, actually, but we had an agent, we had Madeline Milburn on the podcast a couple of years ago, and the thing that really stuck out for me was the way that she described it was, she's basically looking for a reason to stop reading, or to you know, she's looking for that. So as you said, you know, if it's been written in crayon, if your cover letter's been written in crayon or something, or you know, it's just it's terribly written covering letter, or
it's really well written,
or,
but they've sent it to an agent who doesn't handle that genre. That's like basic professional courtesy. And so you're not against the thousands at all.
And not only that, I mean, the other thing, my big thing with this anyway, regardless of whether it's books or it's music or whatever, or podcasts or whatever it is, some people do have this thought that these things are exclusive. So you know, oh well, if they have that book, they can't have this book, or you know, if they read her book, they won't read my book or whatever, which is obviously ridiculous, because anybody knows that people that are into reading or they're into books or genre, I mean, if anything, they want to consume as many different things as possible. You know, and you talked about, you read lots and lots of different genres, and it's the same thing. So it's not, and I think we get on much better if everybody supports everybody else wherever they can and tries to encourage other people, because I think we all kind of bring each other up by doing that, really.
That's what's so wonderful about being in the book world and the author community as a whole, is that it is so supportive and lovely, and you know, I'm so grateful you know, to be in this world, and that's another thing. I mean, the independent authors are incredibly open and helpful. I cannot get over the amount of free information, free support, but really open in terms of figures and you know, tools. But then I have this foot in both camps, you know, so I get to see both sides, which is actually, it's fantastic. And I do find, again, that my sort of trad author groups and friends are all amazing and supportive and lovely. But there is one difference that I see repeatedly, and that is with my trad pub author friends. Not everybody, of course, but there is generally, more often than not, a kind of air of, what's the word I'm looking for? Lack of control. There's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of frustration. There's a lot of, I am really grateful, but this has happened, but that has happened, but I'm not making any money,
and the unknown, I suppose, because as you say, I know that you kind of get, you know, you'll get your reports or whatever as regards royalties or however it works, but as you say, there's lots of stuff you're not privy to,
No, absolutely not, things you don't have control over. And then on my hybrid and independently published friends, and groups and things that I belong to, they're obviously, people can get frustrated and worried about things, but the overall kind of sense and vibe, if you like, is so gung ho and positive, and it's quite funny. Both sides, you'll have lots of sides. It's awful. It's not sides, but in both camps, both sets of experiences, you will have writers who say, "I don't want to market. I just want to write," and they'll say, "Well, and that's something that happens across the board. And whichever way you go, and again, I'm speaking as very much a middleist. I'm no superstar, so I'm sure it's different for some folk in trad publishing. But you still have to do marketing. You do, yeah. And this was I've had this conversation with people. I mean, and I think it's kind of one of the. I think if you do get picked up by a traditional publisher or an agent or whatever, it's kind of expected, and not only that, it's a big part of whether or not you get picked up in the first place. I think now, they have to look at the whole package. It's like, well, is your book marketable? Is it commercial? Are you marketable and commercial? And are you willing to, do the things that you need to do to spread the word and get yourself and your book out there? Which is ironic considering the amount of introvert people that are writers. I know, it's definitely something that I'm still coming to terms with and struggling with, but there are lots of things that you can do which are in your wheelhouse. If you sort of the way I'm looking at it is trying to focus on the things that I actually enjoy doing anyway, and that are kind of authentic, if you like, and sort of trying to sort of work on those, which is why, again, podcast, great, because I love helping people and I love talking to people, but very much from the comfort of my home office in my pajamas. So, that's just perfect for me. But for somebody else, that might not suit them at all. So it's sort of working out, being really honest with yourself about what you enjoy doing. Like, somebody else might be amazing with taking photographs. So, Instagram or Pinterest or something is going to be, a really good platform for them to really focus on. So I think that's one way to look at it. But yes, I'm going to stop browbeating you now and ask you, how are things going with your writing, and have you decided what path you're going to?
Well, I'm going to try the traditional route. So yes, tomorrow.
So the book's all ready. The book's all ready to go.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Yeah, the reason I say that tentatively, and funnily enough, before I came on air, I was actually working out the intro for the show that goes out tomorrow, which I'm going to record after this, and I was kind of writing about this. But it's one of those things. Talking about self-doubt and obviously you, as the word writer, this is very much your domain.
Area.
It's sometimes it's difficult to differentiate between between self-doubt and being scared of getting your work out there or whatever it might be, or whether, as you said, thinking that what you've written is a terrible load of old rubbish. and the thing that you do need, which is a bit of an internal critic, and you do need to be able to look at something and say, well, this is a bit baggy, or do I need that scene, or could I cut this, or whatever it is. And sometimes, especially when you're putting your writing or having to fit your writing around, as I am, around a busy day job and everything else, so you're kind of having to do it piecemeal, and things do take longer than they would normally take if you were doing it full time. Is you get to that point, and I've done the reason that I've tried to kind of look at this within myself is because I can think of at least one writer that I know that I've been in groups and different things with before, and I've been saying to this person, basically since I joined the group, you need to get that sent off, or you need to do something with it because it's ready to go. And this person just keeps saying, well, I just need to tweak it a little bit more, and I need to polish it, and I keep saying, look, this is my argument. I say to him, I'll say, look, when you send that off, because to me, this person, their manuscript was, it was easily good enough for somebody to look at it and know whether it's got legs, or it's got the potential to be signed or whatever. And I said, even if it gets picked up, they're going to make you make changes to it. There's going to be edits, and there's going to be things you're going to have to do. Even if you think it's absolutely perfect and you've polished it to within an inch of its life, I guarantee you'll have to cut some stuff, or you might need to strengthen a storyline, or whatever it is. That's what it's like working with a professional editor. And that is kind of good enough. And over the last sort of couple of months particularly, I've heard my own voice ringing in my head saying, are you that person now? Have you got to the point where you are? And don't get me wrong, I don't think my novel is like absolutely polished to within an inch of its life. I think particularly the beginning part of the book is probably more polished than the end of the book, I would probably say. But I've just got through the last. I'd promised myself that I was going to do one more round of amends, and then that's going to be it. And even as I said that, I then finished editing the last chapter, and then I immediately started reading the first chapter. And I thought, hang on a minute, I am going to be stuck in terminal loop here if I'm not careful. So, and I kind of I bounced it off another writer friend and sort of said, look, what do you think? Do you think I'm just, and she basically said, I think you should just send it because to be honest, I think because my initial thing is I'm sending it to agents. I'm sending it to an agent tomorrow that I've got in mind initially. And I think it's at such a point where if they want it, then they'll say they want it, with a view to that they're going to change it anyway. If it's not for them, or they don't think it's it's up to scratch or whatever, I don't think me spending another 6 months on it's going to make any difference to that at this point. No, you're absolutely right, and I'm really glad that you've done what I'd advise to do, which is set yourself a deadline for when you're going to start submitting, and then just start submitting, because you're right, it is really hard to tell the difference, to know like when is this fear and I'm sort of messing with it, and when is it actually just professional doing the work. And it is really hard to know that. But I mean, honestly, if I didn't have deadlines, I would never, ever give books away, because they're never done. They're never good enough. Ever, ever, ever. They're never finished, never good enough. It's either the deadline has hit and it just has to go, or I've worked on it to the point when I am so sick of the sight of it, usually both of these things, in fact, that I can no longer read it because I know the words too well. And no. Well, I think you become almost blind to it, and I think that was my other concern with it, and this is kind of what I mentioned in the intro that I'm going to be recording after this, is that I think time and time again, whenever I speak to successful authors or agents or editors or whatever it is, they say, the thing that always stands out to them more than anything else when they pick up a manuscript for the first time is voice. Everybody talks about this ethereal thing, voice, like, when you try and describe that, and it's like it's something that's either there or it's not. It's kind of a difficult thing to describe. And I think sometimes if you're not careful, you can edit that out.
Definitely.
I mean, my novel is in first person anyway. It's first person present tense, which is not everyone's cup of tea anyway, which isn't something else to bear in mind. But it's in first person, and if you're not careful, you kind of because I often think with those things, the way that you started writing it in the first draft, particularly in the early chapters, when you especially if you've got the character really set in your mind and you start, it's almost like you can hear them in your head and they're talking. And then if you spent like several years, a couple of years or whatever with the same thing going around in your head, and then you start editing those things and you say, actually, I'm going to put an extra word in there, I'm going to tell you, you've lost their voice, and it can be difficult to kind of find it.
And the other thing is that when it comes to submissions and things, I mean, you know this because you've been chatting to people and you've been researching this, you've been in the world, so you know that this process can be a long one. But the other thing I would say is that putting submissions out, it's not a case of you have one chance with this one, you have one chance with one agent, with one book. It's just not how it works at all.
No, of course not.
It is just this ongoing thing, and it might be, you might send out 30 submissions, and then if you're getting positive feedback, then you know you're on the right track,
Exactly.
even if that particular book doesn't make it.
Yeah.
And you decide to do it yourself or whatever, whatever. You have these other options. But the main thing is you are going to get an idea. But it's so subjective. It's not a case that you're stepping out on stage and there is this one person in the audience. And other than that, it's completely empty auditorium. And they are the voice of all literature and art. And they will say, yes, Wayne, or no. That is not the case.
No.
But it can feel like that.
It's not like they're going to.
Really scary.
Yeah, you know, you kind of got it in your mind. Oh wait, the word will get around. You know, whatever you do.
Yes. No, but it is so subjective. That's the other thing.
Yeah.
And again, you have to collect as many rejections as you possibly can.
This is
because
how
it'll be good practice for the rest of your writing career.
Exactly, yeah. But the way that I kind of described it, and it's like a sales term that I've heard used in previous jobs and things is, to get to the yes, you have to go through a lot of no's. If you're doing like telesales and things like that, which are done in previous lives, it used to be, well, you need to make a minimum of 10 calls to maybe possibly get one, maybe yes, and obviously with sending your book out and stuff, obviously the odds are even, they're even greater than that. But it's collecting those no's, and it's that journey. And it's interesting what you say about the deadlines, things and stuff, because my day job is in video production, and a lot of the time we're working with like corporate clients and different bits and pieces, and I am not the slightest bit precious about that stuff. Not that I don't care about it or anything, but at the end of the day, if somebody needs something by March the 1st, or they've got an event that it's going to, then it has to be done. So, we do it. I give it to them. They make the change. They tell me the changes they want to make, and then I do it and I hand it over because there's a deadline and it has to get out there. It kind of made you kind of anxious, and everything else was this kind of treadmill thing that someone's expecting this book at a certain date and they may or may not take it or whatever.
It was the uncertainty of knowing I could spend, because I'm not a fast writer, it was the uncertainty of knowing I could spend a year working on a book and then it not get published, which will have meant that I've made no money, and I really ought to have been working, and what on earth am I doing? Letting my family down by not earning money and things.
Sure.
But the difference, I think, just what you were saying about your day job stuff, I think that if you can transfer some of that attitude to your writing life, I do think that that's the way to go, because again, and I'm talking to myself here, I'm reminding myself of this, because I need to keep on reminding myself and relearning this. But ultimately, the more you write, the better you get at it. So the more, you're practicing all the time. And the best thing to do is to write something, to finish it, and then get it out the door, whether it's out on submission or to the editor, whether you're going to publish it yourself, whatever. Get it to readers, because they're the ones who actually are the judges. Sounds awful, but they're the test case,
It is. And I
they're
mean,
who you're writing for.
Yeah. And I mean, that has helped, because although this is the first time I'm actually sending it out to somebody that may or may not pick it up or whatever, before this I have sent it to 3 or 4 beta readers, which again was like a big thing.
Well done.
I don't know, with that I wasn't as I didn't have as much fear with that, although I was a bit uncertain. I was interested. I was more interested to see whether it would land or not, or whether people get it or whatever. But the feedback I got from that was, overwhelmingly positive. So that was good, and that was a big boost.
That's good.
To my confidence. I did get certain bits of feedback and suggestions of things that I could tighten up or whatever, which was useful. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting because you talk about the non-fiction, because I am working on a non-fiction, but I'm collaborating on a non-fiction book at the moment that's going to hopefully come out next year, and we will be self-publishing that, we think. I'm going to independently publish that. But I'm far less precious about that, and for some reason I can look at that purely as a more business-orientated kind of thing,
Well, non-fiction is easy. I mean, I find non-fiction easier to write because it is personal, the non-fiction that I write, but it's not as personal as the voices in my head.
No, that's right.
Characters.
Yeah.
And also you're solving a problem for someone.
Yeah.
you're talking with some authority through experience or through research, but ultimately you are solving a problem. You're helping somebody. Well, my non-fiction is.
That's the thing that we've got planned. Similar,
it makes more sense, doesn't it? It can feel like, okay, I'm serving a need here. I am helping, and that can really, for me, I think, it sort of helps to get over the other sort of sense of vulnerability and self-doubt. Although, to be clear, I did feel pretty vulnerable when I released Stop Worrying, Start Writing, because it is quite personal, and I do talk a lot about my my process and sort of personal things in there. But then people were so kind. The response was so overwhelmingly kind.
I think Well, I found that with the podcast to a certain extent. I mean, to be honest, this is about the most I've ever spoken on a podcast, Sarah, since you've come on. So normally the guest does most of the talking, but I feel like I'm in a therapist chair today. Maybe it's just the mood you've caught me in as well. But
it's my evil power. That's
what it is. Yeah, you flipped it.
Yeah, you can tell I'm you.
But I have, the odd time, like in my introductions or whatever, that I've kind of opened up a little bit. Not that I feel like I'm like particularly secretive or anything like that, but most of the time I don't sort of bare my soul on a regular basis on the podcast. But when things do come out, or you admit to feeling a certain way or whatever, as you say, most people really appreciate that. Because usually they feel exactly.
Then,
I do. Yeah,
it lands with people.
Yeah, because people see something in themselves. It's the same thing. It's like, oh, I thought that I was the only person that felt like that. Oh, I'm glad that you said that.
But we have to remember that with regards to our fiction as well. That exactly that fact that when we are vulnerable, a wee bit open, maybe to the point where afterwards we're thinking, oh gosh, did I open up a bit too much in that podcast or whatever?
Yeah.
But then you get that connection, you get that feedback, you get that empathy and positivity from people. And I think it's the same with fiction, because whatever it is in your mind, whatever it is that you like doing, whatever it is that you're interested in, whatever it is that really floats your boat, whether, it's vampires or I don't know. All I can think about is vampires now I've said that. But, cake, whatever it is.
Yeah.
If you let your soul, your personality, the things that you care about and are fascinated by and think are cool, if you put them in your book, I guarantee that there will be people out there who also think cake-loving vampires are the best thing in the world, and they are so delighted to have found a book about them, and they will respond in exactly that same visceral, soul-level way to your work.
Absolutely.
And that is amazing. And I think if we can, again, I'm talking to myself here, as well as you, but if we can try and remember that at all times, that we're still solving a problem for people, we're still helping them, we are helping them feel less alone through storytelling with the really cool things that we both love.
That's a great way of looking at it, yeah. And you've been talking about, obviously we talked a lot about self-doubt and different bits and pieces and making ourselves vulnerable and things. Is there a specific part of the creative process at which you feel the most vulnerable, and why and how do you overcome that?
My flippant answer is, throughout the entire thing, because I am a jelly, I am a wreck. But the really honest thing these days is that I lie to myself so expertly that during the first draft I'm pretty fine, because no one's ever going to see it. So I do worry that there isn't a story there and that kind of thing, because I don't plan. But the real self-doubt doesn't really kick in too much, because it's just la la la, I'm just having fun, no one's ever going to read this, put on some loud music, on we go. So I would say then it's probably getting closer to when it's going to editor or agent, and then before publication, oh my goodness, I'm a complete wreck.
You're waiting,
just before it goes out in the world. I mean, it's been I think 6 or 7 I've done now, and every single publication I have been, sick with nerves.
Really?
So that, the weeks before I can't sleep, I feel physically ill. And then it goes out and the sky doesn't fall in, so far, touch wood. And I get some good reviews and I get some nice feedback. and I'm fine. And then, I don't read reviews as a rule, and I just then crack on with the next.
Yeah. Doesn't your husband read the good ones out to you? I seem to remember.
Yeah, that's no, he still does that. He still sends me, he'll send me Monday morning motivation, which is, a few nice lines, reviews and things. So no, I still don't read reviews. I still have to sort of do those kinds of things to protect myself, because otherwise I won't be able to write. So, that's probably the worst.
Right, let's take a quick break there for this week's Book Bloggers Corner. And this week, Catherine Sunderland, aka Bibliomaniac, reviews One Little Lie by previous guest Sam Carrington.
This is the BBC Book Bloggers Corner.
I'm a huge fan of Sam's novels and was really intrigued to read this, her third book. And I was really pleased that, just as with her previous novels, One Little Lie had me turning the pages more rapidly than my fingers could keep up, and gasping with shock as the story unravelled in front of me. This story is about Alice, Deborah and Connie. Deborah's son was killed 4 years ago, and Alice's son is in prison for committing that crime. Connie is a psychologist working with Alice. There are some fantastically clever lines in this book which are all gasp-worthy, and one of the first ones is when we watch Alice preparing for a group meeting. The topic and reason for this meeting is not explained until the session starts off with the words, "I'm Alice and my son is a murderer." One Little Lie is an ambitious novel. There were multiple viewpoints in first and third person, and a complex and intricate plot with storylines that weave their way in and out of the different narratives until all the links are fully revealed. It is masterfully handled by Carrington. The pace at which the action moves, the point at which the twists are revealed, and the order and sequence in which we hear from people is perfectly judged and very well executed. Each section ends with a cliffhanger to die for, so you can forget about doing anything else, because once you start reading this, you'll be compelled to get to the end. This would make the perfect book club read. Not only is there a very engaging storyline, there are lots of things to discuss. One Little Lie looks at nature over nurture, motherhood and responsibility, and whether children can ever be described as monsters. Or perhaps more interestingly, can a mother ever really know her child? And is a mother's intuition right, or even strong enough to know the truth about her child? But also, although there's lots that would make for good discussion, this is also a very gripping read. There was one point in particular where I almost rubbed my hands with glee, and had Carrington been in the room, I would have high-fived her for the fantastic twist. I highly recommend this compelling, clever and intriguing thriller.
Book Bloggers Corner.
There you go, that was One Little Lie by Sam Carrington, as reviewed by Catherine Sunderland, and you can find a link to that in the show notes, along with a link to Catherine's blog that's got loads of great book reviews and recommendations. Right, let's get back to my chat now with Sarah, where we moved on to advice for new writers.
For somebody starting out, a new writer that's just beginning their journey, maybe they've just decided they've been toying with creativity and writing for a period of time, and they're just about to start out on their journey, what would be your kind of most helpful tip, or the first piece of advice that you'd give them, do you think?
I mean, everybody says, read a lot and write a lot. And of course, that is absolutely true. But I would say to really focus on the practicalities, focus on practicing. Don't focus on the end result as far as possible. Lie to yourself again about, if let's say you're writing your first novel. Every single time you sit down to work on it, you have to put the idea of writing a novel right out of your head and focus instead on the tiny little chunk, the tiny little thing that you are doing in that moment. So I am going to write, I'm going to practice writing. I'm going to try writing this scene for 20 minutes or whatever it is. Use that kind of language all the time to yourself, so that you're continually focusing on the day-to-day, the habit of it, the practice of it, the developing your craft of it, and as far as possible try and ignore the end result, because I think that can be really helpful, and it's also good for just sort of developing good work habits.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit like, it's the walking thing, isn't it? You just keep putting one foot in front of the other, and eventually you'll get to the destination.
Definitely.
Just don't look up or don't look down. Depends how you look at it.
Don't look anywhere. Just close your eyes. Just keep, no, hang on. Don't walk right.
Yeah, there's loads of people walking out into the middle of the road.
Let's say a quick disclaimer here.
It's not
official advice.
It's a good metaphor for pantsers, though, really. That's kind of what we do. We just wander off into the woods with our eyes closed, hoping that we'll come out the other side at some point. So do you think, kind of on that, as we kind of move towards the end, do you think that you've said a few times throughout that, you know, you still very much fly by the seat of your pants, and obviously you've been doing it for quite a while now. So, and I think you've talked before that you've kind of toyed with and you've tried various different things with planning and outlining and stuff.
Wayne, I have tried so hard to change my process.
And have you just come to terms with it now? You just accepted that this is the way that you are?
Yeah, I've given up. Yeah, no, I have. I've decided a few months ago, I just thought, why am I... Okay, it's good to try things. I would always say try different things, absolutely, because you won't know.
Yeah.
But ultimately, why am I trying to change this? Because I get a book out at the end of it. You know, it might not, you know, whatever I might think of the end result, however, filled with self-doubt I might be about the product, I do get a book out. And not everyone can do that. Not everyone writes books.
No.
And I've got a tendency to think that if I can do it, everyone can do it. Mm-hmm. If I can do it, then everyone else can do it, and much better than me. So it was a real... So I'm just saying that just to sort of really put in context how much of a big deal it was when I suddenly thought, actually, not everybody does this.
Yeah.
Not everyone who starts a book finishes a book. So if by some miracle I am managing to do this, maybe I should respect that process and stop beating myself up about it.
Yeah, I think, well, I do think we've talked about it before on the show before, but I do think that, the only rule really is that there are no rules. And I think it's whatever works best for you. And I still don't think that writing is inherently, it's not an efficient process. I don't think there is an efficient way to do it, really. I know people can write quickly, and some people, I was listening to one of your shows recently with, is it Paul Teague or somebody like that? And he writes
machine,
5,000 words
My goodness,
a day or whatever. And I know that some people can do that, but even so, at some point, as he says, that's the first draft. He still has to go back and he still has to edit it and he still has to do everything else. And so I just think inherently it's not an efficient thing. I mean, the book that I'm, just finishing now, I write in Scrivener, and I've got like a separate file that's kind of like trash from draft 2 or something it's called, and there's some horrendous amount, there's something like 30,000 words in there, and that's not an exaggeration. And my book is nearly 90,000 words, so that's like a third of the book was. And it's, when I say that's not stuff like that's normal editing, as in things that I've cut back or tightened up or whatever. That's failed plot lines. That's like plots going off into the wrong direction, or writing myself into a cul-de-sac, or realizing I don't need that subplot or whatever. That's a lot of words, and that is not efficient at all. But I've ended up where I've ended up, and I think the story's better for it.
Yeah, definitely. No, I think that's the way to look at it. You're right. It's not an efficient process. I think you're absolutely bang on. And the thing about, having a folder with 30,000 words in it, well, again, you wouldn't think anything of it if you were an artist, and maybe you are, but if you were a painter and you'd filled, a notebook full of preliminary sketches, and you'd done a couple of, I don't really know how painters work, but let's say you'd done a couple of, starter paintings or kind of different views of it before you got to your final one, you wouldn't be thinking, oh, that's, you wouldn't consider that.
No, it's part of the process.
To be exactly. And so I think writing, but again, however you do it, as you say, it's different for everyone, and it may well be different from book to book. I mean, maybe my process will change again, but I'm not as anxious as I was.
You're not going to force it. Yeah.
No, and again, I have just written a book that came out really, really easily compared with others. So right now I'm high on my own writing process. Give it 6 months and I'm completely stuck, and I'll be reading an outlining book. Just you wait.
Just something to mix it up. So you obviously mentioned the books that you've got out at the moment. So what can you tell us what's next, or what you're working on at the moment?
Yeah, sure. So I'm sort of a good way into the first draft of the next Crow Investigations book, because The Night Raven is the first in a series. And so again, I was a wee bit nervous. I'm sort of saying, oh, look, it's a new series. And then what if everyone says, oh, no, thanks? That would be embarrassing. But no, luckily that hasn't happened, which I'm delighted about, because, I'm really enjoying writing the second book. And I'm also kind of about halfway through a book that I'm writing, which my agent is then going to be shopping around and submitting and so on. That is not going quite as quickly as I'd hoped, but hopefully by the end of the year that will be done.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah, so
busy. Well, people should continue to check out your excellent podcast, The Worried Writer. And obviously tell people where they can also find you online and on Twitter and everything else.
Well, my author site is Sarah-Painter, and that's PAINTER.com. And as you say, you can find me at Worried Writer, which is worriedwriter.com. And I'm usually procrastinating on Twitter at Sarah R. Painter.
Brilliant. Excellent. Well, thanks so much for coming on. It's been a pleasure to talk to you, and I have actually been doing a lot of the talking, too much in my opinion, but it's been really good to have you on, so thanks a lot.
No, thank you so much for having me.
Okay, thanks again so much to Sarah, and I'll put all of those links in the show notes over at joinedupwriting.co.uk, and you should definitely check out Sarah's books, fiction and non-fiction, as well as the brilliant Worried Writer podcast. That pretty much wraps things up for 2018, but don't forget you can find the entire back catalogue of interviews on the website. Make sure you subscribe at Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Overcast, or wherever else you get your podcasts from to have the show downloaded automatically every week. Also, remember to get in touch with all your writing news, views, questions or comments, and tweet me with where you're listening to the show. And also, don't forget to join the mailing list over at joinedupwriting.co.uk. It's completely free, and you'll get those bonus things I mentioned earlier on. Regardless of whether you celebrate Christmas or not, I wish you all a happy, peaceful and productive end to the year, and make sure you join me for the first show of the year, where I'll be chatting to Karin Salvalaccio, and that's a really good chat. Until then, thanks for listening. I'm Wayne Kelly. Happy writing, reading, eating and drinking, and I'll see you next year.
Joined up.